Hello everyone, my name is Rob Murray. Alongside me is my good friend Aidan Rupert, and welcome back to the WCHC Sports Podcast, where we discuss the latest news and updates from around the sports world. We are back from our brief end of semester hiatus, and given our last installment was circled around the theme of Thanksgiving, episode 16 will be in the spirit of the Christmas season, as Aidan and I will be making our own wish list for sports in 2021. As always, before we begin, WCHC Sports 88.1 FM has got you covered on Holy Cross Athletics, JuJu Smith-Schuster's TikTok account, and everything in between. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page and give us a follow on Instagram at WCHC_sports. Aidan, it's good to be back. Hope your finals run was not too insufferable. It's nice to hear from you again.
It's good to be here, Rob. I will say that my finals run was nowhere near as impressive as perhaps LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers in their previous finals run, but I made the most of it. And, you know, on our part, it seems a little bit of a jump that we are going straight from Thanksgiving into Christmas, but all I'm going to say is 'tis the season, and yeah, it's real good to be back, and you and I talked, and we're going to be getting back to putting the podcast out on more of a regular basis for the next 6 weeks or so in preparation for the spring semester 2021. So nothing but sports. We've got the NBA coming back. We've got primetime NFL coming up with the postseason run just around the corner. College basketball, we've got it all. It's not necessarily the sports equinox we saw throughout the COVID times of fall sports just a couple months ago, but we definitely, once again, have a lot going on, a lot to cover. But for today, we're going to be talking about just some of the things we are most wanting out of 2021 in terms of sports. What is on our holiday wish list for the 2021 calendar year in sports? And I'm going to kick it off to you to get things started. Why wait? So what's near the top of your list in terms of what you want out of sports this coming year?
Given everything that's happened in 2020, I think there should be a pretty obvious choice. I want fans to fully return to sporting venues whenever the time is appropriate. I find it frustrating and honestly sad that when I turn on a game now, I no longer expect to feel the energy from the crowd or see tons of fans packed into their home stadium, excited. Now all that's left for us to hear are the sounds from the playing field, which, don't get me wrong, is always a welcome sound and they add to the game, but when there aren't any fans, it's not the same. And like you saw last night, now we have Marv Albert awkwardly breathing and sniffing into the mic. I'm not sure if you caught the Warriors Nets game, but that was just another subtle, depressing reminder of the state we are in the sports world currently. To me, the fans make up half of the sporting experience. Obviously, the other half coming on the field. The passion, excitement, electricity they add to some of the best sports moments we've witnessed simply can't be replaced. This year alone, I can only imagine what the scene would have been like in Los Angeles, where the Dodgers won their first World Series since 1988. Imagine if they did it in front of their home fans. Imagine Laker fans celebrating LeBron's fourth title in person, getting to see him accept that Bill Russell Finals MVP trophy. Or even the Tampa Bay Lightning hoisting their second Stanley Cup in front of their faithful fans. Having a Super Bowl at full capacity this year, I think, is a little wishful thinking, given that it's early February and we're in December and we still got a few months to go, I'd say. But a fully packed NBA Finals or Stanley Cup Finals, which I think is set to be around June, if I'm not mistaken, would be the momentous return sports fans deserve. They've waited over a year for it, and boy, do they deserve it.
Yeah, I think that you're certainly right in saying that should be near the top, if not at the top of our wish list for 2021. Couldn't agree with you more. To your point, I think that it's not only the moments in sports, the raising the championship banner, closing out a series. It's certainly those moments or those victories, but it's also isolated plays, right? I remember even just last night, I was watching NBA opening night, And Kelly Oubre of the Golden State Warriors, he had a ridiculous putback jam right over Kevin Durant in the first or second quarter. And, it just surged so much energy into that Golden State team. You could see it on the bench. And I certainly sat up in my spot on the couch, but there was still something missing. It was a play that would have brought tens of thousands of fans to their feet had they been there in the arena if they were playing in the Warriors' home arena, that is. And, on perhaps even a greater scale, think back to the NBA bubble playoffs, as successful as they were. Think about a shot like Anthony Davis's game winner against the Denver Nuggets, the game-winning three-pointer, or in the first round, Luka Doncic when he hit that 30-something footer to beat the Clippers in that first-round game. It's just moments like that, as well as you said, Rob, closing out a series. Both of those things, they're just so much better in front of fans. And one last thing, Marv Albert, I think that maybe awkwardly breathing and sniffing into the mic isn't necessarily something that's new to us during times of COVID, but it certainly is perhaps a bit more pronounced. He and Kevin Harlan and Reggie Miller, they were doing the broadcast last night. They're not even in the same studio, Rob. I'm not sure if you noticed, but we had, at least in the first game, I think it was Marv Albert. He was down in Atlanta, whereas I think it was Chris Webber. Webber was on the call, and he was up in New York. So in terms of replicating that atmosphere, not only are they working from the standpoint of not being courtside, they're not even with one another. So I know that TNT last night, they employed these duos that have so many years of experience broadcasting together. But when you think about maybe they try and put duos or trios on the broadcast that don't have as much experience whatsoever, frankly, I worry in terms of what that's going to look like in terms of being able to pick up chemistry in broadcasting out of nowhere if you're hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, that lack of physical proximity, I guess, is what I would say, certainly would affect chemistry. I saw the same dynamic with baseball tonight in their Sunday night baseball broadcast, where they had guys in different locations calling the same game, and at times there was a bit of an awkward pause, or commentators were interrupting each other, and it kind of slowed down the general flow of the game. And great broadcasting, not even just the fans coming back, is something that I'll be looking forward to once people are allowed back in stadiums. But let's move on from that. Let's go to number one on your wish list. Talk to me about perhaps the best rivalry in American sports, and not just the NBA, and your expectations for it in 2021.
Oh boy. Well, aside from the wanting fans back in our stands as sport fans, this is right near the top of my list. This is like the big present that you ask mom and dad for. You ask for that and nothing else because you would settle for this. And that is, in my case, a Celtics versus Lakers matchup in the 2021 NBA Finals. Since in October, the Lakers, as you know, Rob, they tied the Boston Celtics for the most NBA championships in the history of the league, following their victory over the Miami Heat in 6 games. And in terms of Celtics-Lakers as a head-to-head matchup, these two storied franchises, they last met in the finals in 2010 with Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, and company avenging their 2008 loss to Pierce, Garnett, Allen, and Rondo. And since that 2010 matchup, both franchises, they sort of went through these mass overhauls or rebuilds in which neither team was especially competitive relative to their history. But this was especially true for the Lakers, who, after missing the mark with their failed experiment with Steve Nash, Dwight Howard, Gasol, and Kobe, they didn't make a single postseason from 2013 until their return to the NBA bubble in 2020, in which, once again, they won the championship. And the Celtics, meanwhile, they had the Big Three era, and then they pivoted and quickly they traded away Rondo, but they missed only the 2014 postseason before they actually made kind of a surprising run to the 2015 playoffs. I think they went 40-42 or so that second year under Brad Stevens, and they quickly established themselves as a legit team in the East shortly thereafter for years to come. They captured a regular season conference championship or two along the way. They had a couple conference finals matchups against the Cleveland Cavaliers and most recently against the Miami Heat. But, I'm sort of at a crossroads in terms of where I view this current Celtics team. We can talk about that at a later date. I'm excited to see them tip off their season tonight against Milwaukee, but as good as they may be, the Lakers are currently favored in terms of betting odds to repeat as NBA championships in 2021. And in a recent survey of the NBA's general managers, the most GMs said that the Lakers, even after winning the championship, they had themselves the best offseason in the league. And in terms of their losses, they lost Danny Green, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, Avery Bradley. But in terms of how they retooled to defend their championship, they signed or traded for Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell, who nearly won a Sixth Man of the Year award a year ago, Wes Matthews, Mark Gasol, and not to mention the emergence of a 20-year-old second-year player, Talen Horton-Tucker, who just had a studly preseason showing a week or two ago. And the Celtics, on their part, they flipped Gordon Hayward and Enes Kanter, essentially, not to mention Brad Wanamaker, their backup point guard. They, in return, ended up with Jeff Teague, Tristan Thompson, and a couple of promising rookies who still have to prove themselves. And I think all of those Celtics acquisitions need to prove themselves. They're not nearly as maybe established in terms of winning as some of those players the Lakers obtained, such as Marc Gasol. I think the jury's still out on the Celtics, and once again, the Lakers, I think rightfully so, they're the favorites to repeat. But one thing I'll say about this Celtics-Lakers history and why I especially want them to meet in the 21 finals is when you think of the Laker legends in the history of the league, such as Jerry West, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and more recently Kobe Bryant, you think immediately, as a basketball fan, of their finals matchups with the Boston Celtics. And LeBron, on his part, he now has a chance to establish himself as a bona fide Laker legend if he has not already done so in his brief time with the franchise. But winning a championship against the Boston Celtics would surely do this for him. Not only would it mark his fifth ring in terms of catching up to Michael Jordan, but in terms of how he would go down in Lakers folklore, so to speak, it would do him wonders. And once again, these the two franchises, would be facing off for the most rings in NBA history. And I think it's only right that they have the chance to do that against one another. The Lakers, over the past 20 years or so, have caught up, winning six championships since the year 2000, whereas Boston has only captured the 2008 banner after dominating the 80s, the 60s, and here and there in the 70s as well. And so I want to get your thoughts, Rob. I mean, I know that you obviously have a rooted interest in the Chicago Bulls. I don't see them making a finals run this season, so where do you stand in terms of what finals matchups you would like to see? And is this selfish of me to ask? I mean, I want Celtics Lakers.
It's not selfish at all, and I'll get into the Bulls later. They're actually third on my wish list in terms of the success they'll have this season or lack thereof. But before I say who I'd like to see in the finals, I think your point on LeBron having the opportunity to really cement himself as an all-time great Laker is an interesting one because if you look back at the guys that you've mentioned, you have Shaq, Kobe, Magic, Kareem, Jerry West. I think all of those guys, if I'm not mistaken, have been back-to-back champions. I don't think Jerry West has done it because he was a unfortunately frequent casualty of those great Boston Celtics teams with Bill Russell, who won like 8 straight finals in the 60s. But you look at guys like Magic Johnson, he repeated in the 80s. Kareem did the same. Shaq and Kobe three-peated in the early 2000s. Kobe had his own repeat in 2008 and 2009. And LeBron has the chance to do it again. Not that his greatness as a player is particularly in question this season, but his legacy as a member of the Lakers I think could certainly stand to benefit even more if he decides to go back to back. Uh, and as for your question earlier, I'd love to see Lakers Clippers in the Western Conference Finals. First of all, I think we got robbed of that last year just because the Clippers uh, just seemed to bust after Game Five against the Nuggets in that second round. They were really a big letdown, but they had a strong performance last night. Hopefully, they're hungrier than they were last season and stand up to the likes of the Lakers because I think those two teams would give us a phenomenal series. And in terms of the East, I'm sorry to hate on your Celtics, but I'd love to see the Brooklyn Nets get to the NBA Finals
Hmm.
and meet the Lakers. Not only because I think those are going to be the two best teams by the end of the season, but the storylines, aside from the one you pointed out, of course, with the Celtics, are perhaps the biggest. You have LeBron James and Kevin Durant meeting in the NBA Finals once again. Uh, you could call those two players their, you know, each of their players' biggest rival, considering how competitive they've been across the NBA landscape, even as they've moved to different teams across the past decade. You have LeBron going up against his former teammate Kyrie Irving. They've had their fair share of disputes and verbal spats the last few years, even being on separate teams. And there's, of course, the narrative that Kevin Durant cannot win kind of leading his own team. You can make the argument that he led the Golden State Warriors just because he was the most talented player, but he's going to be the most talented player wherever he goes. Now, he definitely doesn't have a roster as loaded as the one he did in Golden State. The Nets do have a very solid bench, but this is Durant's, I think, first opportunity for a legitimate finals win in the eyes of many NBA fans. So I'd have to say the Lakers again coming out of the West. Um, I've learned it's foolish to bet against the King, and Anthony Davis, he gets he gets overlooked somehow,
He's getting
despite
better.
being despite getting better and being a top five, maybe even top three player in the league at this point. And some nights he is the best. That is indisputed. But coming out of the East, I got to go with the Nets. Durant looked, he looked healthy. He looked good last night. The Bucks are going to be an interesting team to look out for. Can they bounce back after some recent playoff disappointments? The Celtics look like they're getting better, building on a nice deep run last season, and the Miami Heat as well. They kind of came out of nowhere. Can they sustain? Excuse me, that solid run? But yeah, I'll go Nets Lakers in terms of what I want to see because I think that would be the most uh, narrative dense matchup, if that makes any sense.
No, I think that's fair. I think if not Celtics, from my perspective, I would love to see the Nets in
Yeah.
terms of Kyrie LeBron, KD LeBron. Speaking of KD LeBron, I would say since about 2012 or so when they first matched up, it was Heat Thunder, and the Heat closed that series out relatively easily. No one really thought it'd be much of a series considering the Heat's disappointment the year before and Westbrook Durant. They were just emerging onto the Western Conference scene.
And
But
James Harden, don't forget
James
who was
Harden,
on that team.
that's a good point.
Hard
And
to believe.
yeah, we may get to James Harden a little bit later on, what he's been up to.
Oh boy.
But no, I think that since circa 2012, it's really been like a Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal sort of vibe between LeBron and Durant. Only for the past 3-4 years or so, ever since Durant took his talents to Golden State, it's been like one of those guys was on steroids, and it wasn't necessarily a fair fight. And you could say that KD still has Kyrie or whatever. He has a good roster. But LeBron, as you mentioned, Rob, he has Anthony Davis. And so all bets are off in terms of if those two end up on a collision course in the 21 finals. So if not Celtics, then Nets. I think that sort of passing of the torch, a matchup between LeBron and Giannis would also be worthwhile. But one of those three series, and I would come away from this season a happy NBA fan.
For sure. And I love how you threw in another tennis analogy. I can always count on you for that on this podcast.
Of
But
course.
I'll move on. It's item number two on my wish list, and that's my Chicago Bears drafting a quarterback. Uh, Listen, credit to Mitch Trubisky on how he's played the last 4 weeks since he took the starting role back from Nick Foles. He's thrown 8 touchdowns, just 3 picks, 68% completion percentage. almost 100 passer rating. The Bears have scored 25 plus points in each game that he started, which is something they haven't even done since week 3. Week 3 is the last time they scored over 25 points, which speaks to just the pure inefficiency on the offensive side of the ball. But all that being said, I think with Trubisky or Nick Foles in, the Bears are closer to a full rebuild than they are to a legitimate contender. And the product on field shows. The storyline ever since the 2018 season has been the offensive struggles and the inability to pull their own weight when the defense has shined. And it's kind of humorous now that Trubisky and the offense are putting up points. The Bears defense has ranked near last in all metrics in the last 4 weeks. So, of course, nothing can go right for us at the same time. But I cannot trust the current general manager and the current administration for the Bears to select a new quarterback because, of course, we infamously took Mitch Trubisky over the likes of Deshaun Watson, who went to the Houston Texans, and, of course, the former MVP, the Super Bowl MVP, Patrick Mahomes, went, I think, 8 picks later to the Kansas City Chiefs. So, first and foremost, I think our GM should get fired, and the next order of business of the new GM should be to draft a quarterback. I look at a guy like Mac Jones from Alabama or Kyle Trask from Florida, given that Trevor Lawrence is going to be the number 1 pick. Justin Fields will probably be the number 2 pick to the Jets. But these two guys kind of flew under the radar this past season, and they're the 2 Heisman candidates at quarterback in college football, despite it being, one of the strangest seasons we've ever encountered. These two guys faced off in the SEC championship last week. They both threw for over 400 yards. Jones had 5 touchdowns. Trask had 3. It was a shootout. Alabama won 52-46. So I think some of these guys have real talent. We just got to surround them with good pass protection and hopefully turn the state of the franchise around because ever since that great 2018 season, we've been pretty disappointed, and I think all Bears fans everywhere can agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, Rob, I think that Bears fans, I think that maybe it was wishful thinking, but they may have been kidding themselves if they thought that either Foles or Trubisky was really the long-term answer to this franchise. And we've talked about on previous podcasts just how Chicago seems to be stuck in a purgatory of sorts of mediocrity, not necessarily able to turn the corner, but not the bottom of the bottom either. And I think that so much of that may go into being a large market team, as we've seen throughout other sports and in other cities, not to synthesize with the NBA as I so often do, but I think that so many Celtics fans, they just became anxious when post Garnett, Allen, and Pierce, the franchise was turning towards a rebuild. And ultimately, they had one of the quickest rebuilds in NBA history and ended up with a really credible franchise as a result. But I just remember being in that spot and thinking that this is a team with so much history, big market, a lot of championships. I can't embrace this as a fan. And I think Chicago may be in sort of a similar spot. Even the Chicago Bulls, right? They are sort of in mediocrity themselves. They're not the worst, but they're certainly not the best. And the Chicago Bears, they have a lot of history as an NFL franchise with their 9 championships, albeit only one in really the Super Bowl era. There's still history to be told there, and I think that Jones and Trask, they're definitely worth more than a look because, as you mentioned, Rob, this offense has been struggling, and something's got to give. I think a new GM may be the answer for this team, but I mean, in terms of the Chicago Bears, I think it's time to let go on some things and maybe look in other directions.
I agree. Certainly time to move on. The quarterback play, mainly the past few seasons, has kind of turned us into a laughing stock for most of the league. Luckily, I can thank teams like the Jets and the Falcons that they're still around. I think they take most of the flack from NFL fans everywhere. But as much as I hate to admit it, I completely agree with your assessment that Chicago sports has become a little bit of a purgatory, and I think Boston sports, in some regard, has kind of suffered the same mental conditioning. I guess the Blackhawks are coming off their kind of golden era of 3 championships this past decade. They're sort of in the middle of their rebuild. They had a nice playoff series win in the bubble, but they were clearly no match for the Vegas Golden Knights, a clearly superior team. So they're kind of on the downswing. We'll see what happens with them. The Cubs, coming off their World Series in 2016, the high point of probably all Chicago sports. Um, they've been struggling to, not only make the postseason, but stay in it the past few years. They've been having to get rid of some guys, and there are rumors that they're going to trade some of their star players to build back up their farm system. The Bears seem to be stuck in purgatory after their 12-4 season 2 years ago, and the Bulls seem to be running in place the past 3 or 4 years. They haven't won, I think, the 2015-2016 season. So when you have a certain degree of success, like the Blackhawks did, like the Cubs did, like the Patriots did, who aren't going to make the playoffs this year, I think as a fan, once that time comes around where you acknowledge you have to start rebuilding, it's hard to accept, and you think, well, maybe if we retool here and trade this guy and maybe get some draft picks and replenish this position, we can make a run. But failure is inevitable in the sports world, and at the end of the day, it's a business, and everybody gets their time. And I think, unfortunately, for the past year or so, and maybe even the next year or so, Chicago sports is going to have to take a back seat.
Yeah, you're not going to go from crawling to running. You got to walk somewhere along the way, and I think that maybe Chicago's between crawling and walking right now, if that makes sense. But I
Yeah,
think it's time to retool, reassess, and then be the fastest in the world.
yeah, we'll be back. Mark my words.
So moving on now to the next item on my Christmas wish list for sports. This one, I mean, it's sort of a bit self-evident as well, but all I want as a sportscaster and really a basketball fan and as someone who loves his college is I just want a successful Patriot League basketball season, or for the season for the men's and women's teams to proceed as planned. As of right now, the season's only 10, 11 days away or so, as they're currently slated to tip off most, if not all, Patriot League basketball programs on January 2nd, which is a Saturday. And as for Holy Cross for men's and women's, that entails a back-to-back against Boston University for both teams. And Rob, right now I'll focus on the men's team and the men's Patriot League just because we're going to have the chance to focus on Holy Cross women's basketball in future podcasts. But really, I mean, last season, as you know, it definitely left more than a lot to be desired in terms of the Crusaders and how they fared on the court. But, you know, we've talked about in previous podcasts, this is sort of the year where anything is possible, especially given how often you're playing against the same teams. As you know, Rob, the Patriot League made the decision to rearrange sort of their double round-robin format into more of a schedule where you're playing teams that are in close proximity to you. They've actually banned overnight, or they've banned plane rides and essentially reduced most, if not all, overnight travel for these basketball games. And so I'm looking at January 2nd against BU as a chance for Holy Cross to flip the narrative on where they were 1 year ago, in which they won only a few games. And it's not going to be easy for this men's team. We have talked about, though not extensively, just the exodus of players from this program under second-year coach Brett Nelson. And I think that there's a lot that goes into that. He took over for former head coach Bill Carmody relatively late and was actually not hired until July. Typically, you have coaches that have a lot more time to build than just a few months before the season starts. But at this point, there are only 4 players returning for the Crusaders that played meaningful minutes last season, and really only 3 that were in the rotation extensively at all. That being sophomore guard Ryan Wade, senior forward and leader Austin Butler, and senior forward/center Matt Faw. Joey Riley still coming off the bench, most likely for the Crusaders. But you have some newcomers in this program. You have transfer junior Malcolm Townsell, who appears to offer a lot of promise based off his statistics and highlights. A lot of people are high on the freshman forward Luth Kulbali, who is a 6'8" freshman from Canada's Top Flight Academy. I actually watched a highlight reel of him a little bit earlier today, and trust me, he is bringing some of the size that the Crusaders were lacking this past season. He's a strong dude, and I can't wait to watch him play both on TV and especially in person. But looking around the Patriot League, I think that maybe it's a step down overall from where perhaps the conference was just a year ago or so, but it's not too much of a step down. You still have some great players all throughout. You have senior guard Jordan Burns for Colgate. He's put together one of the best careers in the history of Colgate. You have Cam Davis, big-time guard for Navy. Not to mention Walter White has really come into his own as a forward for Boston University. There are so many players to name, more than perhaps we want to get into on this podcast, as probably we don't have too many avid Patriot League fans aside from Holy Cross listening to us. But it's going to be competitive. I think that, Patriot League basketball, I've said this in the past, it's among the most high-quality basketball out there at the collegiate level, even though you don't necessarily have the big recruits or the big names that you have in the power conferences. You have a lot of homegrown talent and players that spend a few years working their way up within their programs and develop good relationships and fit in well with their coaches' systems. So Patriot League basketball is something I'm really just looking forward to. I hope that you and I, Rob, we can somehow establish some sort of broadcasting presence sooner rather than later, or at least some sort of coverage on basketball, as it sort of is. It's long overdue. We haven't had it for 9 months now, ever since the women's basketball team, they were abruptly cut off due to the onset of COVID lockdowns. So Patriot League basketball, it's been a long time coming. We're 10, 11 days away now. I'm just hoping that we don't look back and we can just move forward and do this safely.
Me too, Aiden. And it's sad that you'll be coming back to campus all ready to go, and the Crusaders will be more than halfway done with their season already. It's a tough reality, and like you said, these teams in the Patriot League are going to have a lot of time to get used to one another, and it's hard to beat the same team twice, let alone 3 times, even 4 times, like some of these matchups with BU and Colgate and Army. So, there's a chance for Holy Cross to put up some major wins here. Of course, you want to build upon last season. It was a rough go for a lot of these guys, and I'm sure they're eager to get back on the court and prove what a cohesive unit they are. And I'll be excited to see how the coaching staff can bring a lot of these players from different backgrounds together, like you said, given the exodus of talent we saw in the offseason. But yeah, Crusader basketball, Crusader sports in general, we hope to get back because they bring a really unique energy and excitement to campus, especially in the fall and winter time. So prayers up to Holy Cross basketball. Hope you guys can get a full season under your belt and make us proud. So for my third and final item on my wish list, I'm going to return to the Chicago Bulls. I want progress in year one of the Arturas Karnisovas / Billy Donovan regime. Not necessarily success. That can be a very vague term. I just want progress from the last 3 years. The Bulls made some major front office changes this offseason. They fired their coach, Jim Boylan, who was ineffective at best, and hired Billy Donovan, to my great surprise. Considering the past 5 seasons with the Thunder, he's led them to the playoffs every year. Their performance last year perhaps being the most impressive of them all, given that they dealt Russell Westbrook and Paul George before the season started. So I was shocked that the Bulls were able to get a guy like him who seems to have an affinity for coaching young players really well. If you forget, Aiden, Donovan coached Florida, the Florida Gators, for 19 seasons. He won back-to-back NCAA titles in 2006 and 2007. So he has experience in some of these big games, which a young Bulls roster desperately needs. A lot of these guys haven't even seen a playoff game, and they haven't even sniffed getting close to the 8th spot in the Eastern Conference, which I think we may be able to make a push at if everything goes right this season. If we can hang around that 8th spot, which is, you know, often very shallow. It often doesn't take a winning record to make it. You saw the Orlando Magic and the Brooklyn Nets, I think, have losing records in the 7th and 8th spots in the Eastern Conference last season. But I have faith in Donovan. I have faith in Karnisovas, who was formerly the general manager of the Denver Nuggets, who have developed some really special homegrown talents that we've talked about a lot on this show, the likes of Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, to name a few. And I'm hoping he can bring that same level of development for guys like Lauri Markkanen, who had a great first year or two, but seems to be on the downswing now. And he's even looking for a new $20 million a year contract, which I don't think the Bulls are going to be willing to give him. And I don't think he's honestly quite deserving of that number just yet. Kobe White, Wendell Carter, and the newly drafted Patrick Williams are also guys that I'd like to see blossom under the tutelage of Billy Donovan and Arturas Karnisovas. So the Bulls don't have to wow me this year. They don't even have to make the playoffs. I just want to see them be competitive, especially down the stretch, and make those teams in the 7th and 8th spot, which are probably going to be once again the Magic. Maybe the Toronto Raptors will be around there too. The 76ers. I want to make them sweat a little bit. I want the Bulls to show that this year might not be their year, but in the years to come, they're a young, dangerous team that could make some noise down the line.
Yeah, Rob, I hate talking about this with you, but I will say that I always have had a bit of a soft spot for the Chicago Bulls, dating back to obviously the Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler era. I loved players such as Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, and I always think about that triple overtime performance from Nate Robinson several years ago against the Brooklyn Nets. My mind, for some reason, it always goes back to that game. I'm not quite sure why.
Yeah, you should remember that about Nate Robinson, not how he got absolutely knocked out by Jake Paul a few weeks ago. I think we can all wipe that off of his resume, and I think he'd like to do that as well.
That's beautifully stated. I wish that maybe that memory had circulated the internet just a little bit more in the aftermath of the Paul fight, because Nate Robinson was certainly a fighter himself, and I would encourage any listeners unfamiliar with this game. I'm not even sure what year it was, Rob, 2014 or 15, thereabouts. Just look up Nate Robinson 3 OT versus Nets, and you'll have that come up in a heartbeat. But yeah, getting back to this roster, I don't think it's too far-fetched to suggest this team could perhaps make a run at the 8th seed. It would take an underperformance of a team like the Wizards, or maybe if the Pacers even struggle this year, to open up that spot. But I think the real problem with the Bulls is they have some legitimate pieces. They just don't have any depth. I think that I'm actually personally sold on Zach LaVine. I think that he's, what you see is what you get defensively, but he's a bona fide offensive stud who I think can improve even more on his efficiency. Markkanen and Carter, I think that's a legit front court. They just need to stay healthy, as has been the problem for both players. But I love Wendell Carter. He was a guy I actually, as you know, had the chance to play against in high school, so I've followed his career pretty closely, and I'm glad that the verdict on him is that NBA scouts and GMs, they're sold on him. They still like him, especially with the Chicago Bulls team. Pat Williams, I think it could happen for him. He's a long athletic forward. Kobe White, I think he's going to have a long NBA career. I think that he's maybe never going to make that jump to being an all-star, but he should be a quality option for quite some time. And who knows, maybe he could prove me wrong. But it's just beyond those 5, you have Otto Porter, who is established, but he's significantly overpaid, doesn't offer a lot of upside. And then some of your bench consists of Daniel Gafford, Dotson, Garrett Temple, Denzel Valentine I used to love. I'm not quite sure where his career stands at this point. But yeah, just a lot of players that they've shown flashes, such as Arcidiacono. Thad Young is obviously past his peak, but it's a team that I can see being fun to watch until those starters come out and you start to put in those bench guys. Once again, I like Chicago. I like the franchise. Always have had a soft spot for them. But, I'm not sure if it'll happen this year. But hopefully moving forward, they start to consolidate some of those young pieces maybe get someone to play alongside Zach LaVine, who I hope stays in Chicago for the long run.
Yeah, maybe even just get 30 wins from you Bulls. I don't think that's too too much to ask. I hope
Well, that
it's
would be
not
a lot of
because
wins. The NBA is playing 72 games. That would be a lot of wins for the. I know what you mean, though.
that is true. Yeah, we just haven't been able to break the 30 mark ever since the days of Jimmy Butler. But yeah, I did forget they were playing only 70 games. I mean, 10 games does seem like a lot to take out of the schedule, but the NBA has come back quicker than any league, any American sports league has ever in terms of the layoff between the last game of the NBA Finals and the first day of the regular season. I think it was 71 days from when the Lakers won the championship to when they played the Clippers last night, and the next shortest layoff was I think the 2013 NHL season when there was a lockout the year before, and there was a 99-day layoff in between those two concurrent seasons. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I saw that on the TNT broadcast
Yeah,
for.
it was all NHL. It was NBA, then three NHL's
Yeah,
had a lot of strange circumstances that have caused these short off seasons, but I think
yeah,
that's why the NBA players complain so much more often about it. But Chicago, they've had one of the longest off season in sports, right? Because they weren't down there in the Orlando bubble, if I'm not mistaken. So, in terms of Zach LaVine, I'm really hoping his legs are feeling fresh and he's ready to lead Kobe White and this young core to some victories.
me too. Tell me about the Bills, Aiden, for your final item on your wish list.
Yeah, so
Your
moving
hometown Bills.
from the Bulls to the Bills, I think that, and we've sort of, or I have discussed this a little bit vaguely in previous podcasts, but the Buffalo Bills are certainly generating a lot of buzz in the Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse region right now, and perhaps never more so than this past week or so, as last weekend they actually captured their first AFC East division title since 1995 after a Week 15 win over the Denver Broncos. And really, Josh Allen, he is playing the best football of his career right now. And what we saw earlier on this season from the Bills was just a couple of hiccups, but they have really just turned the corner on their season and not looked back since. The Bills, for those unfamiliar with the NFL's history, they sort of have a bit of a reputation for being a cursed franchise of sorts. They were the only team ever to advance to four consecutive Super Bowls dating from 1990 to 1993. But they actually also possess the distinction of not having won a single one of those opportunities. And so, I don't know. I think it's maybe jumping the gun to say that this is the year for the Bills. I think that you have obviously some tremendous teams between Kansas City and others that are going to be difficult to overcome. But I think that there is something to move on and work with for the Bills, and we're seeing that this year. I actually mentioned a couple of Josh Allen statistics. I don't have those in front of me anymore, but on a previous podcast, he's not only putting together his best season by far, but he's been maybe the second best, maybe third best quarterback in the AFC. Do you think that's fair to say, Rob?
Yeah, I actually have Josh Allen's career stats up for you, so no need to worry there. But yeah, he's put himself in the MVP conversation for sure, and I think you can make the argument for Josh Allen being a top two quarterback for 2020 in the league, maybe top three if you want to put Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes ahead of him. They seem to be the two leading the MVP race, but Josh Allen's going to eclipse 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, something he didn't even come close to his past two seasons. He's going to have a completion percentage of almost 69%, which is almost 10 percentage points greater than his career high last season. The Bills are a Hail Mary away from winning their last 8 games. There was that heartbreaker against Arizona on the final play with DeAndre Hopkins, but it's remarkable seeing how much Josh Allen has progressed because he was seen as the guy from his draft class that probably had the lowest floor at the time he was drafted, but certainly had the highest ceiling and the most approved. Just given his height and his arm talent, he can bomb the ball downfield. He's 6'5", almost 240, so he's got the build for a great, strong quarterback. And he's finally fitting into that mold this season. He's got a passer rating over 100 for the first time in his career. He just got selected to the Pro Bowl. He's in the MVP race. So it's a great time to be a Bills fan, excuse me, not a Bulls fan so
Both.
much. Um, a great time to be a Josh Allen fan. And, I'm rooting for Buffalo. That's a fan base that has not had a lot of luck across the history of their franchise, not even the past few years, given their performance in some of these Super Bowls. And the Chiefs are going to be a tough mountain to climb. I liken them to the Golden State Warriors. You don't think anybody can beat them until they finally get beat. But as for right now, the only team that's really had their way with them in the postseason was Tom Brady's Patriots, and that is no simple opponent for sure. So all credit to the Bills. As a Rochester native, I know you're rooting for them, and I'm rooting for them too, because it'd be a fantastic story to see a guy like Allen, who's been criticized heavily the past 2 years for, accuracy issues, to just burst onto the scene, lead a really efficient offense, and get his team to the promised land for the first time in franchise history.
And in terms of a potential collision course between the Chiefs of the AFC West and the Buffalo Bills, interestingly, NFL, their power rankings they release weekly. As of yesterday, they've got Kansas City at 13-1, appropriately at number 1 in their power rankings, but moving up from number 4 all the way to number 2 now, the 11-3 Buffalo Bills, surpassing the Green Bay Packers as well as the New Orleans Saints. And so, in terms of players beyond just Josh Allen and his brilliance these past several weeks, Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley, they are actually slated to become the first Bills receivers to go over 1,000 yards in the same season since Peerless Price and Eric Moulds back in 2002, so nearly 20 years now. So it's not only the play out of the quarterback spot, but also some outstanding receivers that we see really carrying this team right now. There were some questions as to whether the defense would hold earlier on when we had those couple hiccups, but I think those questions have perhaps been resolved in large part, and it's just a matter of will it hold against a team like the Kansas City Chiefs.
That is the question for sure. I mean, you can say the Chiefs have been the best team in 2020, but the past 7-8 weeks, I think there's no argument against the fact that the Bills have been the hottest team in the NFL. They haven't won a game by less than a touchdown since week 8. So, they're clearly trending in the right direction. You mentioned their wide receivers, how much better they've gotten. Stephon Diggs, I think, is a huge component to Josh Allen's success this season. He ended up being one of the best fantasy football wide receivers, if we want to talk a little fantasy this year, which was largely unexpected. But, yeah, I'm excited for the Bills as much as anyone else is, because, when they play well and that fan base is energized and excited and jumping on folding tables, there's not an environment that's much better in the National Football League. But let's move on to our assists, fumbles, and what to watch for to wrap up our returning episode here. My assist of the week is the University of Kentucky men's basketball team, who held their annual Christmas charity event where they provided local families with food, money for rent, mattresses, Kentucky basketball apparel, and even a few Christmas carols in a time where everyone should be allowed to celebrate and be happy despite all that's going on in the world. It's nice to see that even in the middle of an uncharacteristically poor 1-5 start from the Wildcats, they've lost 5 in a row since winning their opening game. It's nice to see the men's team take time out of their busy schedules, ones that I'm sure have gotten a lot more challenging during the COVID season, and give back to their community and people that really need their help. So that was a very heartwarming Christmas story, one that could even melt the Grinch's heart, so to speak, and not get too cheesy in 2020.
Nice, Rob. So for me, for my assist of the week, I've got to give it to recently acquired Milwaukee Bucks guard Jrue Holiday, as Holiday recently made the decision to donate the entirety of his NBA salary for this upcoming season to support black-owned businesses as well as nonprofits and various initiatives. And the reason I bring this up especially, Rob, is Jrue Holiday. Obviously, he's a player that he signed a big contract as a premier NBA talent, but when you think about the faces of the NBA, Jrue Holiday is certainly not one of them. He's not necessarily the flashiest player. Um, he's only been on a couple of good teams throughout his career. And so, where I'm going with this is he's not necessarily the player that rakes in enormous endorsement contracts. And so, Holiday's decision to support these charities and businesses with his money, it means something different than a player like LeBron James, who has essentially $1 billion contract with Nike just because of what he does for that brand. And one more element I'll bring up in terms of this is that I mentioned he was recently traded for by the Milwaukee Bucks. And Milwaukee, you may recall, they played a large part in the NBA's stance against racial injustice back in the Orlando bubble. Former Bucks player Sterling Brown, he had his own unique or distinct story with racial injustice that resonated with the rest of the league. And so, in terms of moving from New Orleans, a community that he supported for years, to a new destination in Milwaukee, from early returns, you can just tell that Jrue Holiday is going to fit in wonderfully off the court. And if I had to take a guess, I think that he is going to fit in just as well on the court this coming season.
For sure. He seems like a guy who, brings benefits to his community wherever he goes, and that's something very noble out of Jrue Holiday.
And
Taking out
how
whatever he does on the floor. And yeah, happy holidays to Jrue and the Milwaukee Bucks.
And Holiday, I will say one more thing. He actually, he's a stand-up guy, and he's not, as mentioned, he's not one of the more recognized names in the NBA. But his wife now, Lauren Holiday, I believe, who was actually a gold medalist and champion with the United States women's national soccer team. She actually had, I believe it was a brain tumor several years back, and Jrue Holiday made the decision to, take off most of an NBA season just to make sure that he could care for her and provide for her as well as their daughter. So Jrue Holiday, definitely a player who, once again, has been really putting in the work off the court in addition to the defensive brilliance and offensive playmaking he brings on.
Stand-up guy, really, on and off the court, as you can tell. Let's move on to my fumble of the week, and I say fumble in a quite literal sense, as I'll explain in a second. It's JuJu Smith-Schuster and his TikTok shenanigans, should I say, getting him absolutely laid out on this week's installment of Monday Night Football. Of course, this controversy, I believe, started the week prior when JuJu was dancing on your Buffalo Bills home logo, Aidan, before the game. This obviously came after a pretty disappointing loss against the Washington football team for the Steelers. They lost that game against the Bills, and in a really crucial Monday night game against the division rival Bengals, who are just 2-10-1 on the season at this point in time. Juju decides to trot out to the Bengals logo once again and post a video of him dancing on it with the caption, "They told me to stop dancing on the logo and not to be yourself." So, and obviously there's an ellipsis and then a crying emoji and a laughing emoji and whatever else he decided to throw in there. And this leads to the scene where late in the first quarter, he catches a pass over the middle and literally gets hit so hard he gets launched into the air by Bengals safety Von Bell. JuJu fumbles, calling him back to our fumble of the week, and it contributed to the third consecutive loss for the Steelers, who, after starting 11-0, are just 11-0, just look like they're in a complete tailspin. They can't run the ball, they can't pass the ball. The defense just can't hold up that weight anymore after being so strong all season. And this incident has really been a microcosm of the Steelers this past month. Just this really undisciplined play, undisciplined in the locker room as well. The Steelers have had a history of kind of being unable to control their players and instill a kind of a culture of maturity, a business-like culture that you see from teams like the Patriots, where, football's a game, but at the end of the day, it's a business, and you go onto the field to win games. I'm going to call back to Antonio Brown and all the the crazy incidents he had with the Steelers and their inability to kind of reel him in and set him straight. So at the end of things, it finally took a 3 game losing streak and a massive hit for JuJu to come out and say, I'll no longer be doing that on opposing teams' logos, and kind of settle into the mentality that we still have games to win and a playoff push to make. So, credit to him for recognizing his mistakes and kind of buying into the team-oriented mentality as opposed to going on TikTok. But I think a lot of people got at least a little bit of satisfaction from seeing JuJu kind of get set in his place after doing something that a lot of people saw as kind of disrespectful to the teams he was playing against.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this one up, Rob. I think there is something to be said for having fun with your sport. You know, not to be yourself is obviously a discredit to the game if you're having fun with it, but I think there is a degree of professionalism that's expected from you as an athlete. And basically what I get from JuJu's TikTok shenanigans is the equivalent of when I play NBA 2K and I make a big play and I double tap circle to flop on my opponent, causing my players to fall to the court out of sheer disrespect, and then go on to lose the game. That's basically what we've seen these past couple weeks, starting with Buffalo from JuJu, and I think that's a lesson moving forward. I hope that he continues to be himself, but does so in a manner that really helps Pittsburgh turn the corner and rewrite the script on their season.
Absolutely. They were seen as Super Bowl favorites for a long time just because they hadn't lost all season. But and I think, honestly, if the Steelers just kept winning, the whole incident with JuJu, being himself and doing these TikToks wouldn't be much of a problem. The old adage, winning solves everything, in a locker room would certainly be true. I don't think he'd be getting as much attention, but now that the Steelers are really in a rut and probably the coldest team in the league at this point, just shines an even brighter light on the whole situation. But let's move on to your fumble of the week. Tell me about what the Clippers did this past week.
Well, I will get to the Clippers. First, I want to say, though, Rob, we're recording on a late Wednesday afternoon right now, and we're currently awaiting word as to whether or not Rockets forward or guard James Harden will be held out of opening night tonight for the Rockets. There is this drama going on with Harden allegedly being at a strip club recently, unmasked, and there being a video that surfaced of Harden's appearance at the strip club. And you have Harden on his Instagram story now saying, "I wasn't at a strip club. This is false. It was just a club. I wasn't at a strip club. You were at a strip club." So I'm not going to get too much into that just because we don't necessarily know the details as of right now. The bottom line is that Harden has been erratic these past few weeks between not showing up to Houston for the beginning of team workouts and such. So we're going to wait on that one. I'm actually going to give my more official fumble for this week to the Los Angeles Clippers. So last night, the Lakers received their championship rings for capturing the 2020 NBA title, but they were not the only team to receive something that night, as prior to tip-off, according to reports and actually several images, all Los Angeles Clippers players received a brand new PlayStation 5 as well as a headset in their locker room before the game. And so the internet, being the internet, obviously went crazy with this one. You had people tweeting out things like, let's see, let's actually pull up some of the tweets right now. I had some fun reading these. PlayStations over parades, games over gold, cartridges over championships. I'm pretty sure the PS5 may use discs rather than cartridges, but the point is still fair. We have, wasn't Steve Ballmer the CEO of Microsoft, which I found interesting, seeing as obviously Microsoft produces the new Xbox consoles. So yeah, it's definitely difficult. One fan even tweeted out, "As a Clippers fan, this is so pathetic. Lakers get rings and yet another banner, and we get our players PlayStations that they could easily get anyway," which, is not necessarily true. The PlayStation are renowned for being short in stock this time of year. But I'm looking for the one. There was this one tweet I really liked.
I think I'm reading the same article right now, and correct me if this isn't the one that you were looking at, but it's a tweet of Anthony Davis kissing the NBA Finals trophy, and it's saying AD's first season in LA, and then the next panel is Paul George's first season in LA, and it's him kissing the PlayStation 5 with the caption, "She's beautiful. Unveil video coming soon. Thank you," at PlayStation.
There's
Yeah,
that, and there's one more. I'm guessing there are at least 15 people in America more deserving, but less financially able to get a PS5 for Christmas. Because we've talked about, Rob, the Clippers have been on full blast all offseason after choking away their 3-1 lead and then making some questionable offseason moves. So I think that maybe the idea is that the PlayStation would just make all that go away for the players. It seems to have had the opposite effect, as they're really under fire now more than ever. But they did have an impressive victory over the defending champions last night, so let's not forget that.
yeah. I think to say that the Clippers aren't motivated to, you know, correct their wrongdoings from last season is not true. You know, these guys are professionals. They're some of the most talented players in the world. I'm sure the Clippers will be putting every effort possible forth to beat the Lakers, but it is kind of funny when you see a historic franchise winning yet another championship, and their little brothers
Yep.
across the hallway in Staples Centers get PS5s for Christmas, a console that literally no one can get right now, and I can be the first to attest to that. But that is a pretty nice fumble of the week you had there. I'm going to move on to my what to watch for this week, and it's week 16 of the NFL season. It's going to feature plenty of consequential matchups with teams like the Vikings, my Bears, the Cardinals, the Ravens, and the Dolphins all jockeying for that new seventh and final playoff spot in their respective conferences. If you remember, no longer 6 teams per conference. There are 7 teams. Only the number 1 seed in each conference gets the first round bye. So right now the Chiefs and the Packers are aligned to get those 2 spots. And if history is any indicator of how things are going to go this postseason, you'll see the Chiefs and the Packers in the Super Bowl. Historically, teams with the first round bye and home field advantage as well are very, very likely to make the Super Bowl. The New England Patriots being a prime example. They seem to have the 1 seed locked up every single year when they had Tom Brady, and they made the Super Bowl quite a few times. But we'll also have some games in Week 16 with some serious implications in playoff seeding. You have the 11-3 Steelers, who we talked about, hosting the 10-4 Colts in the AFC. They'll be battling for a higher position in the AFC playoffs, and you have the Seahawks hosting the Rams in a game that will likely crown the 2020 NFC West champion, as those 2 teams are only separated by 1 game. But, of course, no episode of the WCHC Sports Podcast would be complete without some fantasy football talk. Week 16 is of additional significance because for some, it's the fantasy semifinals, and for others, like myself, is the championship round. While my other 2 teams have failed pretty spectacularly over the last few weeks in the playoffs, my prized squad with a record of 13-2 is ready to bring this thing home on Sunday. I got Justin Herbert, Devonta Adams, Dalvin Cook. They're all ready to bring me home in a championship. How are your teams doing, Aidan? I haven't gotten the opportunity to check in with your squads as of late, so give me an update. Are you looking at a championship run?
No, I was actually looking at a first round playoff exit, unfortunately. And my season, we talked about, I got off to a real hot start. I started 4-1, maybe even 5-1, and it was all just downhill from there. I'm not quite sure what happened. Matt Ryan just stopped playing well for me. Ezekiel Elliott, that was a big deal also. He just wasn't a reliable option following the
Stop being
Prescott.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
following the Prescott injury especially. So I kept checking routinely just to, put my best players in my lineup, see if anyone was on waivers I could pick up, but it wasn't going to happen for me, and I knew that. And so season wrapped up at 7-6 and a disappointing first round exit, though I did break even according to our league rules. So, $10 means a lot around the holiday season, so I'm glad I'm going to be holding on to that for the time being.
That's right. You can put that towards the PS5 fund if the Clippers don't have anything to say about it.
Yeah, but thank you for asking. Maybe next year for fantasy, and I'm still wondering if I want to get into fantasy basketball this year, or if it's too late to do so. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I played fantasy basketball last season actually. I my team was Team Bobon. That was our name, and we went 10-9. And I don't even know how the postseason went, just because like the season just ended so abruptly. So I
Right.
think the winner was determined on based on like best points or total record or total points and best record. I had neither, but I think I had LeBron, Harden. I think I had Dame as well. It was a small league, so that every roster was loaded, but it was pretty fun. The biggest problem for me was just checking regularly
It's every day.
because yeah, with football it's easy. You get a game Thursday, you get a bunch of games Sunday, and you get a game Monday, and you only have to check maybe 2 or 3 times a week. But for the NBA fantasy game, it's the grind never stops. You never sleep setting those lineups and checking the waivers. So if you're really committed, it could be a lot of fun. But if you're a guy who only likes to check your lineups once or twice a week, it might not be for you.
Yeah, it may be all or nothing, so lots to think about. But lastly, in terms of my what to watch for this upcoming week, in terms of Christmas Day basketball, the NBA is king, has always been king, and rightfully so. The games have always been outstanding matchups, and this year I'll especially be keeping my eye on Nets at Celtics at 5 p.m. on Christmas Day, as Kyrie Irving will be making his return to TD Garden, albeit in an arena in which there will be no fans. Uh, but for my what to watch for, I actually wanted to draw attention to something a little bit more unique, and that's the fact that there are actually several top 25 NCAA men's basketball teams in action on Christmas as well. We have number 9 Wisconsin tipping off against number 12 Michigan State at 12:30. 6 p.m. we've got number 19 Michigan against Nebraska. And lastly, an impressive number 4 Iowa team led by the sensational Luca Garza playing against Minnesota at 8 p.m. Eastern. And so, if nothing else, just know these games for you are there as an alternative, or maybe even just there for commercial breaks in terms of your NBA Christmas Day viewership. And they should offer some really good basketball as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely be tuning into some NBA basketball and hopefully some college hoops too. One thing I always found so strange about playing on Christmas, especially for college kids, is that it's like you and me going to like a different state on Christmas, playing a basketball game when we should be with our families. Like with professionals, I have a little less sympathy just because they are professionals. It's their job. They're making millions of dollars, and I'm sure it's still tough to be away from your family on Christmas. But for college kids, you're not making any money. You're coming off the finish of what was probably a pretty grueling semester, especially as a student athlete. And now you got to, travel across state lines, especially, during the COVID season and all the extra precautions that come along with that, and play your best basketball game for 2 or 3 days because there are a lot of these Christmas tournaments that they do too. So that's something I always like mentally grappled with. I always thought it was kind of a weird thing. I don't know if you have the same opinion on it, but
No,
I feel bad for them.
I agree entirely, and I actually have some experience with this. Christmas 2016, that was actually the year my high school basketball team, we flew down to the Beach Ball Classic in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and that's the tournament we ended up playing Wendell Carter in that first round game. And so it wasn't quite the same. I want to say we flew out of Rochester at about noon on Christmas Day, so we still got to, wake up around our families, do the routine Christmas Day traditions. It just got cut a little bit short, whereas these professionals, and especially as you mentioned, these college men and women, they actually have to sort of miss Christmas altogether. Or I don't know if they're doing it early, doing it late. Probably depends on the family, but it's definitely a sacrifice to say the least.
Yeah, well, hopefully whoever's playing on Christmas can bring a win home to their families in a couple of days. But that about will wrap things up for episode 16 of the WCHC Sports Podcast. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays to all of our loyal listeners out there. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, we'll catch you at the same time next week for episode 17. If we don't see you until then, Happy New Year as well. I think we're all ready to say goodbye to 2020 and embrace hopefully what will be a fresh start in 2021.